Okay, on. Right. So today, as part of this experimentation with vlogging that I'm doing, last week I talked about kind of all the books on my shelf that I've already read, but hadn't yet video reviewed. This week I'm going to talk about all the books on my shelf that I'm kind of started but not finished. And then next week maybe I'll do something, all the books on my shelf that I haven't even started yet, but that I bought because they looked interesting to me. So obviously this is a waste of everyone's time, but I'm just kind of experimenting with trying to talk about something once a week. Yeah, anyways, I don't blame you if you don't watch the whole thing. But that being said, if you're going to stick around, let me explain this. My reading habits are terrible. Let me move this camera over a little bit. Is that better? My reading habits are terrible. I've got the bad habit of well, first of all, I don't read nearly as much as I should. I have ambitions to be an intellectual. Like, that's the kind of person I want to be. I want to be well-read. I want to be smart. But if I were honest with myself, my temperament is not quite that. I tend to waste hours watching junk on TV. I tend to waste hours on Twitter or YouTube or Facebook, or just waste so much time doing stuff that's just not edifying at all, that's turning my brain to mush. So my book list is always a little bit more of an ambition than it is kind of a reality. Secondly, I've got a very bad habit of getting kind of halfway through a book and then kind of feeling a little bored with it and feeling like I want to read something else instead. So then I'll try and read 2 books at the same time, and then I'll be reading 3 books at the same time, etc. I've had this bad habit for years. About 4 years ago or so, I made a real effort to kind of clear out my reading list. Say, okay, I'm only going to read 2 books at a time. One for professional development and kind of one other interest. But even that didn't really scratch the itch entirely, because I also wanted to kind of read one silly book for fun, kind of one light reading, and also one serious book for fun, and also one for professional development. Now we've got book clubs going, so I'm reading books for book clubs that I'm a member of, but I also want to have my own reading list, which includes silly books and serious books. It's a mess. So probably a lot of these books I'm going to talk about, some of them I haven't touched for a long time. If I was perfectly honest with myself, maybe I'd have to admit that I'm not going to get back to them, or that I've kind of given up on them, but I haven't admitted that to myself yet. So I'm still counting them as kind of reading at the moment on my reading list, but yeah, some of these I just haven't made progress on for months. Okay, one more quick housekeeping thing. This camera I'm using has a 30-minute timer after it just shuts itself off. I don't know why. Last week I actually made 2 videos because I wanted to go over 30 minutes. But this week I don't need to make 2 videos. This whole thing is just kind of a waste of time anyways. So when the camera gets to 30 minutes and it just automatically shuts itself off, I'll probably be right in the middle of a sentence, so it'll be a little bit jarring. Apologies in advance. I'm just going to stop wherever it stops. If I didn't get to talk about everything, the world is not going to miss it. Okay, so Don Quixote. This is a book I've wanted to read forever, just because it's one of those classics everyone talks about. So we're reading it for book club now, largely on my influence. Boy, is it tough to get through. And that being said, there's a lot of things to like about this book. And when I do finish it, and I want to finish this, I'll give it its own review, and I'll kind of talk about all the interesting things about it. But it's also just really long. I just finished, well, not just, about a month ago maybe, I finished book 1. And I'm this far into book 2. But, you know, it's funny, I know a lot of people who did finish book 1 and just didn't have the heart to kind of trudge all the way through book 2 after kind of trudging all the way through book 1. And I'm kind of beginning to see where they're at. I'm like, oh, like they're setting off on a new adventure now, and I'm like, oh, we just got done with the old adventure. Do I have the patience to go through this all over again? But I'm gonna, yeah. No point in quitting now. Might as well slog on through so I can say I've read it. The Palace of Desire. So this is book 2 in the Cairo trilogy. I read book 1 last year. Working my way through book 2. It's going a little bit slow because I've got like 20 other books I'm reading at the moment, but I'm enjoying it. Over halfway through at this point. Hopefully finish it off at some point soon. The Moral Animal by Robert Wright. So this is another book club book. One of our friends wanted to start a non-fiction book club book. Which would make this the 3rd book club I'm in, which is pushing things a bit, but I decided to give it a try. So we took like a vote on what books we wanted to read. I'm a history nerd, so I proposed a whole bunch of history books that nobody else voted for, and we ended up with kind of a popular science book, which is not normally my area of interest, but now that I've actually started this book, I'm really enjoying it a lot. It's very interesting. It's about kind of evolutionary psychology, like kind of explaining human characteristics through a Darwinian perspective. I'm not sure I agree with everything, but it's very well written and very interesting, and I'm well into it now. Hopefully I'll finish this and do a proper book review someday. Okay, next. So I picked this up in the bookstore actually over a year ago. Actually, I think it was 2 years ago now, if not more. It's The Complete Stories of Oz by Frank L. Baum. Now, if you're enough of a geek to know about this kind of stuff, I think there are actually 40 canonical Oz stories. But the original author, L. Frank Baum, only wrote like the first 12, I think. Was it 12? I don't know. 12, 13, 14. And those are all collected in this volume here. And I picked this up at the bookstore for 2 reasons. Kind of one, I've always kind of wanted to read the Wizard of Oz stories because they are kind of classics. I mean, they're classic children's books. It's not like reading James Joyce or something. But it's still classics of a sort. And also I was kind of looking for some light reading to enjoy in the evening, kind of getting away from the serious stuff. And I am actually kind of almost halfway through with this. And I did really enjoy the first few stories. But the problem with reading like a big book like this is it just kind of felt like more and more of the same after a while, and I started to get bored with it, and I just kind of stopped reading. So now I'm at this awkward position where I've actually read like 6 of the first 6 books in this thing. But I've kind of left it alone for so long, I don't know when I'm going to get back to it. I think what I'm going to do, for the purposes of reviewing, is maybe just go back to the beginning and just kind of, instead of trying to read the book as a whole, just review the individual books as I read them, because I just got bogged down in the whole of this. Okay, next. Which one am I going to do next? So I try and read some serious books. Actually, sorry, let me go back to the serious books. Get my serious books out of the way first before I get into the silly books. This is Chomsky's Universal Grammar, an Introduction. This actually isn't by Chomsky. It's by 2 guys named V.J. Cook and Mark Newson, but it's about Chomsky's theories of universal grammar. I bought this book through Amazon years ago, like almost 10 years ago at this point. I bought it before I went to grad school for applied linguistics, and I thought, I want to read this before I start the course so I kind of know what I'm talking about. Turns out Chomsky's universal grammar has nothing to do with applied linguistics practically. But I didn't know that at the time. I thought this would be good background reading. And I opened the book, and I don't know if this will show up on the camera. This just is like so complicated. All this jargon and diagrams of sentences, and it's really hard to understand it. So I just kind of gave up on it, and I thought, I'll save this for later, and I'll kind of read some easier books on linguistics and try and work my way up on it. So over the past few years, I've been reading a lot of basic primers, like an introduction to linguistics, etc. But I never quite worked my way up to this level. And then I was reading, there's a guy named Frederick de Boer, who's a blogger. He wrote one time, he said, you know, like, you should kind of always be reading one book that's kind of above your level anyways. Like, that's how you develop. So kind of read one difficult book and read one easy book. I thought, okay, yeah, this will be my difficult book. This will be the book that's above my level that I'm not fully understanding, but I'm going to kind of try and grapple with it anyways. And actually, I found out that once I got about 50 pages into it. I found that once I got into it and I gave it a fair shake, it actually wasn't so difficult after all. I did have to take it slowly, but I was making sense of it. And then I just got distracted by other books, and it's been over a year now, I think, since I last made any progress on this one. But I still have ambitions to kind of come back and finish this once my reading list clears out. Maybe I'm lying to myself. We'll see. Okay. So, with that kind of in mind as one of the heavier books, sometimes I find it's good to have like really lighter books that you can just kind of escape from the real world, you know, when you're feeling a bit down. So I've been trying to kind of keep escapist, kind of really light reading around. I tend to kind of like fantasy. I know maybe that's a bit of cliche, but that's kind of how I like to escape the real world. So I was doing that with the Wizard of Oz stories until I got kind of sick of them, because it does get a little repetitive after a while. So then I was going to the bookstore and just kind of looking. I'm living in Vietnam right now, so the English book selection is always limited. But I found this. It's called Frozen, which is kind of the Heart of Dread trilogy. Have anyone else seen these books? Like, they were all over my local bookstore one day, and they had all these kind of rave reviews on the back cover, which I know you have to take with a grain of salt anyways, but they were saying, like, this is Game of Thrones for like teenagers with kind of fantasy future. Now, I'm not a teenager anymore, but I figured, well, you know, maybe this will be fun. It's not really that well written, but it's good enough. I got about 30 pages in, and I fully intended to get more in, but then I just didn't. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll finish that one. Along the same lines, The Age of Myth by a guy named Michael J. Sullivan. So again, I bought this kind of hoping it would be escapist fiction or something like that. Now this is like, it says book 1 of the Legends of the First Empire. So it's a book 1 of a series. All fantasy books are always part of a series. It's like some law of nature. And it's a prequel to another series he's done, which I never heard about. I just picked this book up because it kind of looked interesting in the bookstore. And I got about, how many pages did I get? About 54 pages into it. And I actually was really enjoying this one. It was good. There was a lot of interesting things going on. It was well written. The world of fantasy was very interesting to me. Like the world building in here. But there was a lot of characters, and I found, because I was just kind of reading this book on the side, I couldn't keep track of all the characters well enough, and then I just kind of let it go. But I think I don't know, I might not come back to this one, but then I really did kind of like the little bit of it I read. I don't know. Okay. So this one comes courtesy of Whiskey Prager, who went through the trouble of mailing it to me. Woody Guthrie, Bound for Glory. And I did get like 2 pages into it. And then I just haven't done it yet because just distracted by everything else. But I do have ambitions of actually reading this. I am interested in Woody Guthrie to a degree. I mean, kind of leftist folk song hero. It is kind of up my alley, really. I don't know. Get that done later. Yeah, Woody Guthrie, Bound for Glory, I think is Woody Guthrie's autobiography. I'm not making any progress on it right now, but I do have ambitions of coming back to it and finishing it once my reading list clears out a bit. Okay. And then right now for professional development, doing a a framework for task-based learning by Jane Willis. Sorry, I can't talk. This is the book, part of the book club we're doing for professional development at work. I am only a little bit into this at the moment, but it's actually very interesting. And I didn't think it would be interesting because like a framework for task-based learning like sounds really boring, doesn't it? But Jane Willis is actually writing very well. It's quite engaging. She's talking about a number of interesting theories about language acquisition. I'm actually liking this much more than I thought I would, even though I'm just a little bit into it. So we're scheduled to finish it by the end of the month, and then hopefully I'll have a full review of it then. Okay. Longman Dictionary of Language Teaching and Applied Linguistics. So you're not really supposed to read a dictionary like this cover to cover, but I've been experimenting with doing it on Quizlet. And I was doing a lot of this for a little bit. But then I think I got to a point where I was overdoing Quizlet a bit and starting to get kind of cramps in my hand. And I thought, oh geez, like, I don't want to get tendinitis over some stupid thing like Quizlet. Like, I'll get tendinitis for something worth it, like, writing the world's greatest novel or something like that. So I've kind of backed off of this a little bit, but I have ambitions to kind of get back into it a little bit at some point. So I'm still counting this as currently still reading, along with, next book, Practical English Usage by Michael Swan, which is another reference book that you're not supposed to read all the way through, but I was kind of experimenting with doing this on Quizlet. I don't know. Okay, getting into kind of the language books then. This is To Kill a Mockingbird in Vietnamese, which I was also doing on Quizlet, kind of slowly translating it into English and doing it on Quizlet for my language studies. I haven't been keeping up with this for the kind of the same reasons. Quizlet was I was overdoing Quizlet for a while and kind of feeling like my hands were getting sore. But I think I'd like to get back into it and kind of slowly work on this. And then Doraemon. Doraemon, it's one of those things. I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of Doraemon, but it's so easy to read that it's very good to kind of practice your foreign language skills. So when I was in Japan, I used to read Doraemon. You can read it in Japanese. The language is very simple. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say you can read it in Japanese. I don't know who you are. But if you're at kind of a pre-intermediate level of Japanese or above, you can have a go at reading this. The language is very slow. They only use The language is very simple. They only use kind of very simple kanji. The pictures kind of carry the story, so if you don't know the word, you can infer them from the picture. And the story is pretty much the same. It's always the same story. Nobita's in trouble. Doraemon gives him some sort of magical invention. Nobita uses the magic invention to kind of solve his problems. Then Nobita gets greedy and overuses the magical invention. Then the magical invention somehow backfires on Nobita and he ends up kind of worse off at the end of it. That's always the same story, which makes it easy if you're reading it in a foreign language. So I've got a few Doraemon books in Japanese that I keep around the apartment to kind of try and keep up my Japanese. Although, to be honest, I've largely let my Japanese go. I haven't been keeping it up. I don't know if you knew this or not. You probably didn't. But Doraemon is also hugely popular in Vietnam. So popular in Vietnam. Doraemon and Conan. So I've got Doraemon in Vietnamese. This isn't it, actually. I picked up the wrong copy. Sorry, both of these are in Japanese. I do have a Doraemon in Vietnamese that I was trying to kind of work through and getting my Vietnamese wife to kind of help me read it. But I don't know if I'm ready for that yet in Vietnamese. It was just like every word almost I had to ask her what it meant. I needed so much support on it. Okay, this is Kanji and Kana. I've had this book for, wow, so long now. I think I bought this back in 2001 when I was in Japan. And it's such a useful reference book. My only complaint is that they write the pronunciation of the kanji in romaji instead of the Japanese kind of katakana or hiragana, which is okay when you're a very beginner, but by the time you're getting around to like the more advanced kanji, then you want the pronunciation to be written in the Japanese script. Having it written in the Roman script, in my opinion, causes problems because the Japanese R is not pronounced like the American R. But when I see it written with an American R, there's a temptation for me to pronounce it like an American R, which has caused me loads of problems in my Japanese studies over the years. That's a different subject. So anyways, I still kind of keep this around, although, again, I've largely given up on studying with it. Oh, wow. I actually got through more than I thought I would. I thought I'd never get through kind of half this stuff. There's actually one more book that I'm kind of in the middle of reading, which my wife has with her now because it's another kind of children's fantasy book, and I just wasn't making any progress on it. So I said, oh, why don't you read this? The language is quite simple. It'll be good for practicing your English. I think she's got it with her wherever she is right now. But that's okay. I don't need to. I barely made any progress on that book anyways. I don't even remember the name of it. Okay, so I actually got through it all. Those are all the books on my bookshelf that I'm currently reading. Probably half of those I will never finish. And optimistically, probably half of those I will finish and review in full at some point. Next week, I'm going to try and talk about the books on my bookshelf that I haven't even started yet, but I bought them because they looked interesting.